Hi, it's me again, talking about what I'm writing. So often I talk about my poetry and I talk about the Blood series, but as I've mentioned on several of the other videos, there are other projects that I'm working on. One of the ones I'm working on is something called A Year in Horror. So what does that mean? Well, basically it's looking at all the kind of horror that I watch, read, and expose myself to over a 12-month period. This idea kind of came about in October, as all kind of creepy things do. It's the month of Samhain or Halloween. As a kind of test or validation for my love of horror. You see, the thing is, it's always been frowned upon that I'm a lover of horror. It's always been, you're too much of a girl for that sort of thing, or girls don't watch that sort of thing, or, you'll never get a man if you're into horror, which is just silly. And it's getting to the point now where not only am I getting you're too much of a woman, girl, female, whatever, to be into horror, I'm also getting, at your age, should you be past that by now? I'm in my mid-30s. I don't think there's an age limit on loving horror. I think certain types of horror are aimed at certain age groups. There's no doubt about that. Teen slashers are aimed at teens. And I kind of watch some of the modern ones now, and I hate them. But part of the reason why I hate them is not because they're necessarily bad horror films, they're just not aimed at me. I remember watching one fairly recently called The Gallows, which, while the special effects on it were good, a nice little bit of a scare, I hated the characters so much because they were just whiny teens. They had, for me, no redeeming feature. And I think as well, you very rarely get older horror characters. They do tend to be aimed at early teens, 20s, maybe even up to this age, to 30s, but you very rarely get the horror victim being an older female, which is a shame. But I still don't think, though, I'm at an age where I need to be worrying about the horror that I watch. So I decided as well, with A Year in Horror, not to only validate my love of horror, but also to expand it. I am a little bit blinkered with the films that I watch. It was always, I've always had a love for the Hammer horror films. I have a love for the kind of old world, kind of 70s creep fests, but not really so much in horror actually of my time. I like the odd 80s film, Lost Boys being one of my favourite films of all time, and I'm a big fan of Stephen King, so obviously I've watched a lot of his adaptations. I'm not saying that they're all good. We all know how hit and miss Stephen King adaptations can be. But I did tend to not watch anything from the millennium onwards. For two reasons. One, I've already hinted upon that they weren't aimed at me. And B, I always felt that they were too much necessarily gore over an actual story. Now, I like horror. I have a love-hate relationship with blood. And I don't mind a film being gory. But to me, it still has to have a plot. And looking at this year in horror and what I watch and, exposing myself to new things, would my beliefs change? Obviously now we're in April, so I'm about must be about halfway through now. I haven't actually worked it out. I have noticed some things that are interesting. I have found a strange love for horror comedy, which is something I was never interested in before. Never a genre that I thought worked well together. I'm not much of a comedic person. You know, my DVD collection is not full of laughs. Yet there was a couple that really, really stood out to me. And funny enough, they're actually New Zealand comedies. Maybe having a love for Flight of the Conchords has influenced that. And speaking of Flight of the Conchords, the first kind of horror comedy that I watched was What We Do in Shadows. Now, my main monster of choice is vampires. Don't ask me why. There's probably some deep-seated Freudian desire underneath all of that. I can just remember for since being about 8 or 9 having a love for vampires that was cemented with the aforementioned Lost Boys. So to have this kind of comedy take, this kind of spoof documentary on vampires, it had been recommended to me several times, and I kind of didn't want to do it. I was kind of worried that it was going to take away the kind of the horror, the intrinsicness of a vampire. And it doesn't. It is amazingly funny, so on the nose. I suppose it's hard to do a documentary on something that may or may not exist, yet the cliches seem to be what you'd expect. The characters are well-rounded. They're not two-dimensional or anything like that. You know, these could be vampires in a horror film. And that is what I think works with them. The little tricks of the werewolves in it, the vampire ball where they bring a human. It is just so funny. I really enjoyed it. Another one, again, another New Zealand comedy which I really enjoyed. This time taking a twist on the haunted house theme, another lovely theme from the kind of creepy gothic films of the 70s. It's Housebound. Housebound is about a girl who is required by law to go live with her mother. She's under house arrest, essentially. She has an ankle tag, and it kind of brings up all the kind of underlying hatred that she's always had for her mother. Especially as her mother starts talking about how the house is haunted. Cue in her parole officer, who's also a paranormal investigator, and kind of madness ensues from there. Again, like most comedies, there are some horrific elements in it. Some of the death scenes are quite gory, kind of like a Sam Raimi style gore. But there's empathy, there's pathos, and there's a lovely twist at the end, which I'm not going to give away how the house is haunted. But it's a lovely idea. One of the other things I've noticed when kind of comparing these films is the modern films can be as bad as I expected them to be. But also some of the films or genres that I love, these old B movies, some of them are not as great as I kind of remember them to be. So some of the lowest marking films that I've got is a film called Anomaly, which is terrible. Please do not watch Anomaly. It is horrendous. I think I saw that on Amazon Prime, and I think it's one of those films that it's one of those independent films. So it's poorly acted, poorly directed. The story is just a joke. Anomaly is about two people who decide to videotape their vegan lifestyle to see what difference it makes. What it does is it creates a portal into another dimension. Of course it does. But also some of the Japanese horror films, which unfortunately are intercut then with American scenes to appeal to American audience, they are also very bad. And I can't quite remember the title of this one, but there's a half man, half ape film that was just terrible. I think because you weren't getting enough of the original Japanese film, which I'm sure was probably amazing, because they usually are. They just show these clips of a kind of Yeti type monster, and then cut to American businessmen in an office talking about how they're going to bring it down, and it does feel like two films cut together. Also, while doing the Year of Horror, I realised that I don't actually watch that much horror TV. And what is horror TV as well? I mean, I watch stuff, the odd episode of things like Tales from the Dark Side, The Twilight Zone, things like that. But I don't necessarily watch a series back to back of what is a horror film or horror type. And there were several out there. I started to watch Penny Dreadful and couldn't get into it. I know that there's many, many more out there that I've never got into, and even now, I still don't feel the need to. And it's weird. I enjoy watching a film, an hour and a half, 2 hours, even a 3-hour film, but I like it to end there. I'm not really into watching something like Supernatural, which is, I think, in its something like 10th series, where you've got to watch every single episode. It's just not for me, and it's still not for me. However, one of the things I do watch and love, and probably because there's only about 6 episodes in total, 6 or 7, and that's Gareth Marenghi's Dark Place. Again, another horror comedy. But this is basically the premise of Gareth Marenghi's Dark Place was it was filmed and created in the 80s. It was deemed too terrible, too dark, not terrible in a bad way, but too terrible as in violence and stuff like that. Part of that whole 80s video nasty movement to be shown on TV. And so it was scrapped. It was held then in dusty lofts until about the millennium, where the TV executives felt that it was finally time to reveal this TV show to the public. And as well as the original TV show, it's cut with interviews from the actors who did the show and the director and things like that. So Gareth Marenghi is a writer. He's probably I always thought of him as an archetypal Stephen King, but actually doing some research on an author that I came across called Guy Smith. Now, Guy Smith has done, I think, over 800 books. He's kind of like the Barbara Cartland of horror. He's done horror, children's books, and softcore porn books, which you don't want to get mixed up. But I came across his series of books called the Crab series. So it's about giant mutant crabs. They are terrible books. The reason why I started to research him is because the books were set in Wales. And I was wondering if, like me, he was a fellow Welsh writer. He's not. What I did find out, though, that his pulp fiction books are the inspiration for Gareth Marenghi. And actually, now that I've read the Guy Smith books, I can kind of see the connection. These are books that are, well, again, not only comparing them to Barbara Cartland in the kind of prolific rate that he wrote, but the style. These are not in-depth books. These are probably the modern day equivalent of Penny Dreadfuls. the beach reading for goths. There's no real depth to them. So anyway, back to Gareth Marenghi. So you have him then talking about this. He calls himself a dream weaver, and he is a little bit pretentious. He is a little bit believes his hype, and he isn't necessarily that good. The program itself deals with 80s special effects, so you can see the wires, you can see the poor acting, you can see the set wobble and things like that, but that was the point. It was almost like a homage to old school B movies. And also, I don't know if this is intentional or not, but there's a British soap opera of the 80s called Crossroads. I'm too young to remember Crossroads, but I've seen clips about it since, and it was, in a sense, terrible. The sets wobbled, like we said, and the dialogue was just awful. It wasn't stuff that people would actually say, and the acting was a bit hit and miss, but people, for some reason, loved it. It had that kind of kitsch quality. And I think that's what Gareth Marenghi's Dark Place has as well. It has that kind of kitsch horror feel to it. And I love it. And recently, I introduced it to a friend of mine who I know is into the IT crowd. And some of the actors from the IT crowd, Matt Berry and Richard Ayoade, are in Gareth Marenghi's Dark Place. And I've always said to her that she should watch it. She likes the IT crowd, she'll like this. She came out and I thought, I'm sick and tired of her waiting to find it herself. I will force it upon her. And she loved it. She only managed to see about 3 episodes. And she messaged me the other day going, right, I'm going to come back around yours so I can watch the rest of the programme I can't pronounce. So I think that's always a sign of a good programme, when you can show it to somebody that is essentially 10 years younger than you and they love it as much as you do. That's what I'm kind of hoping with the book. Not only to kind of validate that horror is good for me, horror I love, and how to focus it and find what I do actually like in horror and not just stick to what I think I like. But also then it might be something that other people can look into and they'll go, oh, I didn't know about that, or oh, that sounds interesting, or I've noticed I have very similar taste to this person, so if they like this, then I might like this. Who knows? Anyway, if nothing else, it's making me watch lots and lots of horror films, which is always a good thing. So that's it for now. I hope you enjoy.